Hi, my name is Anna Drager, and I'm excited to bring to you all the third video on our Hit the Trail series, and that's going to be all about our truck and trailer checks. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that we're understanding the equipment that we're working with. Then we also want to make sure we're maintaining that equipment to appropriate standards so that we keep ourselves and other people, as well as our horses, safe. And finally, even when we do everything right, sometimes things just go wrong, so we want to make sure that we have a plan in place to handle that. So these are just a few definitions that you should be familiar with within your truck and your trailer. So tow capacity is how much weight your truck can pull as well as stop. Payload is what you're going to refer to when that's like when you hear someone say they have a 3/4 or a half-ton truck, and that's the weight that the truck can carry in the back or bed of the truck itself. So that's just making a difference between our tow capacity and our payload. And then gross combination weight rating is going to be the total weight that the truck and its cargo, as well as the trailer and its cargo. Our gross vehicle weight rating is going to be the individual vehicle and the cargo just inside that. So, for example, if I'm referring to that rating for my trailer, it's just the trailer and the cargo inside the trailer. And then our gross axle weight rating is going to be the maximum amount of weight that can be over a single axle on that vehicle. So the key thing with each of these ratings is that we're paying attention to what the manufacturer recommendations are and adhering to those so that we aren't overloading our equipment and creating a dangerous situation. The other thing to think about is that you're always adhering to the piece of your equipment that has the lowest weight rating, and sticking below that so that you stay safe. So you can find those weight ratings. They're going to be found. So your owner's manual for your truck, as well as your owner's manual for your trailer. It'll also oftentimes be posted inside the door jamb of your truck, or for your trailer on the front left side, there'll be a sticker. And then we also on our hitches have the ratings for those usually are stamped on, and then the ball of the hitch also will have a weight rating. So each thing, just make sure that you're going through and double checking to make sure you're not overloading that piece of equipment. So there are a lot of different trailer styles out there. So goosenecks and bumpers are one classification that we talk about. So the goosenecks hooking up into the bed of the truck, bumpers hooking onto the frame of the truck. And then we can also have stock straight loads or slant load trailers. So you just have to figure out which one of these works best for you and your horse and get familiar with it and how it should be set up. So our stock trailers are going to have a little more open format. The main thing with our straight loads and our slant loads is making sure that you're paying attention to how you're loading it. So roads are beveled a little bit so that the inside of the road is higher than the outside of the road. So when I have a straight load trailer, I want to make sure that my heavier horse, or if I have a single horse, they're loaded on the left side of the trailer to help keep that steady and more balanced. And then for my slant load trailers, I want to make sure to load the first, like a single horse or my heaviest horse closest to the side of the trailer that has the hitch on it. So all the way back here. The other thing to pay attention to with your trailer is that you're using appropriate trailer rated tires, because again, those are going to be specially reinforced in order to withstand the weight that is associated with the trailer and the cargo inside it. So you for sure need to make sure that you're staying on top of the maintenance of your trailer and your truck as well. But with the trailer, you want to make sure that that's going in at a minimum to a professional annually. If you do more hauling, you might want to do that more frequently, and especially before a long trip or hauling through the mountains, it's a good idea to also have the professional look at it before you go then, because they'll take a look at all of these things and just make sure everything's in good working order and hopefully prevent some issues from happening on your trip. Per trip, you always want to do a walk around of your truck and trailer once it's all hooked up and make sure that everything looks good and safe, so that we've checked tires and tire pressure. The lights have been checked, that we have turning signals, brakes, and emergency brake or emergency flashers. And then the connection has been hooked up correctly on our hitch so that pins are in place, chains are appropriately attached. Doors and windows all need to be secure, so making sure that we close and lock the tack room door so that doesn't fly open when we're driving down the road. And then similarly with our windows, you absolutely need to make sure there's good airflow for the horse. So this trailer has vents on the top of the trailer as well, but we also want to make sure that at the very least we have that opened up so that there's a screen here on this one so they're getting airflow there. If it's a really hot day, we can also drop that down and keep the bars up. The main thing is you don't want to drop those bars down as well for a couple of reasons. Number one is that the horse can stick their head out and then get hit by oncoming traffic, trees, rocks, all sorts of things that could be flying around on the road. And then secondly, especially if they're a nervous hauler, they might try to jump out of that opening. So making sure that we always have those bars up is going to be really important. And then just a couple other thoughts here. So this is an example of a duct taped divider and a slant load trailer. So that's not going to be safe because that's going to not hold and end up bumping into the horses that are next to it. And then here we have an example of a wasp that has invaded a trailer. And so we want to make sure we're always double checking too before we load our horses in that there's no signs of pest or insects and things like that. So there's a lot of different components to our hitch assembly. You can see those here. Um, and it's going to look a little bit different between our bumper pulls and our goosenecks like you have here. But the main thing is that you have gotten familiar with that setup and know how to do it correctly, and then are always double checking that before you take off. So some key points to highlight. We always want to double check again each component that it's structurally sound and ready to go. So this is an example of a receiver that has been corroded and rusted. So that's going to increase the chance that that's going to fail while I'm using it and cause an accident. And then ball size needs to make sure that we're matching that to our trailer coupler size. So those sizes will be listed, and to appropriately fit together, we need to make sure those sizes match. The safety chains are also going to be another thing to make sure that you keep an eye on. So there are two of those chains that need to be attached to our receiver here, and they'll need to be crisscrossed under, making sure that none of the chains are twisted so that if the hitch came detached, that it wouldn't, the trailer tongue would not drop and hit the road. Then also paying attention to our hitch pins. So this will slide forward when it's attached to the ball. And then there's a hole that this pin slides through. Same thing here to our receiver. When we slide the hitch in, there's a pin that goes through that as well. And just making sure that we're actually using the manufactured pins that are rated for that, not just any item. If you like lose a pin or something, you need to get that appropriately replaced because not every item is going to be rated for that load size. And so then that's not doing the job appropriately. And then finally, our breakaway brake. Another note on this is making sure that we're attaching it actually to the truck, not to the chain, which then attaches to the truck, because the whole point of this is to help us out when or if the trailer comes totally detached. So that's not going to help us in the instance that it's attached to the chain rather than the truck. Then one more thing to note is this is an example of um, a drop mount here. And so that's really useful when on a bumper pull if the truck sits a lot higher than the trailer. So then that would make the trailer kind of sit at an angle, and then that creates extra stress and uneven distribution of weight, which then creates heat and can cause things to catch on fire. So the drop hitch allows you to drop that connection point down so that the trailer sits flat. And then one more final note here is that our bumper attachments need to be so the receiver should be attached to the frame of the vehicle, not to the bumper itself. So you'll see sometimes hitches attached to that bumper, and those are not rated for horse trailers. They're meant for much lighter trailers. So you need to make sure you're using the appropriate attachment for your horse trailer. So just a few other considerations. It's a good idea to be familiar with your rig and knowing what's normal, so knowing how it handles and how it sounds, so that as soon as you notice something seems a little bit off, you can take it in to a professional to work on it. With each load that you have in your trailer, if you have electric brakes, you need to make sure you're adjusting those to the load. And then a couple of attachments that you can add in are a weight distribution hitch and an anti-sway bar. It just helps kind of stabilize the whole rig. One thing I will say is if you are having a lot of issues with sway with your trailer truck combination, that you might want to have it looked at again by a professional because sometimes there's some underlying causes that can be contributing to that, like axle issues or the trailer not being level. So it goes back to, we also talked about that hitch position earlier. So just making sure and getting those things checked out early before they become a really big problem. If you are new to hauling, it is a very good idea to practice driving your rig without the horse on it and in a location that's safe with lots of space. So, like an empty parking lot or something like that. And that's just going to give you the opportunity to get familiar with the rig, practice turning around, backing, also practice hooking up appropriate or and correctly. So, just an opportunity to get really familiar with it before you're in the middle of a trip with horses on the trailer, totally loaded up with your rig. Speaking of loading, you want to make sure that you are paying attention to that GCWR when you're packing. So, that's that total combined weight. So, we're not just thinking about ourselves being in the truck and our horse being in the trailer, but you also have to think about the weight of the hay, feed, if you're packing water with you, your suitcases, your tack, your show clothes. So there's a lot of things that go into packing that aren't always accounted for, and that does all contribute to our gross combined weight rating. So we need to make sure we're not exceeding that so that we keep everyone safe. And then finally, we need to pay attention to whether or not we need a CDL. So one requirement for that CDL is if your gross combined weight rating is over 26,000 pounds, or if your trailer rating with it being loaded is over 10,000 pounds. And then of course, if you are hauling for hire commercially, then you're going to need that commercial driver's license. So, like I said, sometimes we do everything right and still have things go wrong. So, it's really important that we come prepared to handle those situations. One thing we can do to help ourselves out a little bit is planning our route and being familiar with alternate routes that are available. So, that means that we need to understand our rig dimensions to avoid any situations that our rig wouldn't fit on a road or something. Then we also want to think about flat tires because those are probably one of the most common things that people can run into. And just particularly with this, making sure that you have a jack that's appropriate for a trailer. So a trailer or car jack is not going to be rated for that trailer weight. So again, going back to our ratings and paying attention to that. They also have some made for trailers that you can actually drive up on. So that's an option that you could consider as well. Um, and then the other thing I want to highlight here is our roadside assistance. So you want to be aware that as great as some programs like AAA are, they don't always offer support, or they're not able to offer support for trailers. So they have equine specific ones. One of those is US Rider, EquiPro Roadside is another example. So there are several out there. You just have to research it and find what works for you. But especially if you're doing a longer haul, it's a good idea to have that as a backup in case things do go wrong. And then again, I want to emphasize that if you're going on a long trip or you're traveling through the mountains, it's a really good idea to have a professional look at your rig before you travel on that to double check everything and make sure it's all in good working order. So just some final tips and takeaways. It's always better to be proactive rather than reactive, so we can hopefully catch things before we're stuck on the side of the road with our horse. Gaining familiarity with your equipment is just going to help you know and feel when things aren't quite right, so you can stop and get it taken care of. It's really important that we keep that emergency equipment on board and in working order. So we don't want to neglect our emergency equipment either, so spare tires, things like that. And then if you need replacements or need something worked on, it's a really good idea to not guess. You need to absolutely refer to your owner's manual or a professional to make sure that you get those correct pieces that are rated appropriately for your equipment. All right, with that, we will end our week 3 video. So we hope to see you guys next week for our final video of this series. Thank you.